In this video, we're going to concentrate on how to evaluate the impact of scientific knowledge on the manipulation of plant and animal reproduction in agriculture. Now, that seems like a really big dot point, so let's unpack that step by step. So first of all, you're being asked to evaluate the impact of scientific knowledge. Evaluate means to make a judgment based on criteria or to determine the value of something. And what criteria are we actually thinking about? We're looking at the impact of scientific knowledge. So let's look at its impact on biodiversity or continuity of species, food quality, economics, or society. We're going to look at the impact of scientific knowledge on those things. So scientific knowledge means the techniques that might manipulate or change or alter animal reproduction. And this might be things like selective breeding, artificial insemination, cloning. And what effect does this actually have on reproduction and on the continuity of species? And in all of that, we've got to use some named examples from plants and animals. So really, what we're going to do, we're going to make a judgment about how using specific examples of scientific knowledge has actually altered scientists' or farmers' ability to manipulate reproduction. In other words, how has it enabled us to change plant and animal reproduction's timing or number of offspring or quality or genetic variability, and does this impact continuity of species? So let's have a look. There are lots of different methods used to alter the reproduction of plants and animals. Selective breeding, artificial insemination, artificial pollination, genetic modification, cloning, and tissue culture. And to be quite honest, most of these are going to be covered in the biotechnology that we study in Module 6. So we'll look very briefly at them now with our lens of reproduction on them. But in terms of technologies, we will study them in more detail when we meet them again in Module 6. So I'm just going to pick a few of these, not all of them. Selective breeding. Selective breeding you have heard of, probably, because it's equivalent to artificial selection, and it's kind of the man-made version of natural selection. So it's when humans choose a characteristic and we decide which males and females will breed together, and then we look at the offspring and we pick the best ones of those and breed them together. This means that biodiversity is going to decrease because we're going to lose some characteristics in favor of the ones that we want, but hopefully the ones we want are increasing food quality. So for example, better corn or more tasty beef. Now, artificial insemination, or AI, not to be confused with artificial intelligence, which is also AI. This is where we take semen from a champion bull or a stallion and we divide up that semen sample into many, maybe 1,000 small samples and freeze it. At this point, we can send it anywhere in the world, which is great because the bull or the stallion does not have to go traveling around the world. So you can actually use this top quality semen to father many calves or many foals and improve the quality of the herds all over the world. Now, this has the potential to decrease biodiversity because one male can become the father of thousands of offspring, but it could also increase biodiversity because it means that if you're a farmer in one area, you could actually import some genetically diverse semen from the other side of the world, which your cows may not have had access to before. It is an improvement in animal welfare because you're not risking an animal's life by traveling, sending them around the world. And if you're selecting for the right features, it could include improving food quality, for example. So in terms of scientific knowledge, what you need to know to be able to do this well, you've got to know about reproductive hormones, about the cycles of the estrous cycles of the females when they're ready to receive the sperm. You need to understand how cold storage or cryo storage affects cells and how to defrost cells afterwards. You need to understand about genetics and animal pedigrees so you don't breed animals that are related to each other, and you have to understand about disease prevention, because you don't want to be passing a sexually transmitted disease or a bloodborne or mucus-borne disease around the world. So lots of bits of scientific knowledge that we'd need to know. Artificial pollination is kind of the flower equivalent. It's a very old technique. Gregor Mendel used it, and you just basically transfer pollen from a desired male plant onto a desired female plant. Again, biodiversity can go down, food productivity can go up. In fact, there are some crops like kiwi fruit which we can only really eat in large quantities because artificial pollination is the way that they are pollinated and make their fruit. And the last example we'll look at for this in sort of overview is cloning, and cloning by tissue culture. This is because you can take small samples of plants, just a few cells, grow them on special growth media made of sort of agar with plant growth regulators in them, so plant hormones, and you can turn a few cells into a little bundle of cells called a callus, and then you can apply special hormones which cause shoots and roots to grow, so those plant organs develop, and then you can transfer those plants into soil. And this is a great way of increasing biodiversity, and you can preserve rare plants, like for example orchids. However, if you're growing crops and you're just growing one type of crop, like for example cauliflowers, you're obviously going to create a monocrop because they're all genetically the same, therefore that would decrease biodiversity. So depending on what you're trying to grow, you could have both effects. And here we're going to need to have a knowledge of plant growth hormones as well as sterile techniques so that you don't create infections in these very vulnerable cells, especially at the beginning of their life cycle. So lots of different ways that we could attack this first question of evaluating the impact of scientific knowledge on the manipulation of plant and animal reproduction in agriculture.